Throughout history, the narratives of influential figures like Jesus and Moses have been shaped, reshaped, and sometimes deliberately manipulated to fit prevailing ideologies, political agendas, and cultural biases. These figures, whose lives and teachings have profoundly influenced billions, have undergone a historical whitening, a deliberate attempt to obscure or diminish their African origins. This erasure is not only a distortion of historical truth, but also a reflection of broader efforts to suppress the contributions of Africa to the tapestry of world civilization. To understand why the African origins of Jesus and Moses were erased, one must delve deep into the intersection of faith, power, race, and historical revisionism. History, as a construct, is rarely neutral. It is often the story of the victors, shaped by those in power to align with their ideologies and worldviews. The narratives of Jesus and Moses are prime examples of how historical and religious figures can be molded to serve specific purposes. The question of their African origins is not simply a matter of geographical accuracy or biological lineage. It represents a broader discussion about identity, belonging, and the struggle for cultural representation. To suggest that Jesus and Moses were of African origin challenges deeply entrenched beliefs, reshapes centuries of religious art and literature, and forces a re-examination of the cultural heritage of Judaism and Christianity. The erasure of their African roots did not occur in isolation. It was a gradual process, one that began with the rise of empires and the spread of colonialism. The Roman Empire, which played a crucial role in the spread of Christianity, was deeply invested in creating a universalized, Romanized version of Jesus, a version that could appeal to diverse populations across Europe. The transformation of Jesus into a figure with pale skin, light eyes, and European features was part of this process. Similarly, the narrative of Moses, rooted in the ancient civilizations of Egypt, was stripped of its African context as Western interpretations of the Bible took precedence. One cannot overlook the role of European colonialism in this historical distortion. As European powers expanded their reach into Africa and the Middle East, they brought with them a worldview that prioritized their cultural and racial superiority. This worldview found its way into biblical interpretation, art, and education. To acknowledge the African origins of Jesus and Moses would have been to challenge the very foundations of this colonial ideology. By presenting these figures as European, colonizers could justify their civilizing missions, presenting themselves as the bearers of a religious and cultural tradition that was inherently superior. The impact of this erasure extends far beyond academia and theology. It has shaped the way societies view Africa and its contributions to human history. The image of Africa as a dark continent, devoid of civilization and culture, was a deliberate construct, one that served to justify slavery, colonization, and exploitation. By stripping figures like Jesus and Moses of their African heritage, the West was able to reinforce this narrative, portraying Africa as a land of savagery, far removed from the divine and the sacred. The African origins of Moses are perhaps the most evident when one considers his story in the Bible. Born in Egypt, raised in the Pharaoh's court, and deeply embedded in the cultural and religious traditions of ancient Africa, Moses was undoubtedly shaped by his environment. Egypt, during Moses' time, was one of the most advanced civilizations in the world, renowned for its achievements in science, art, and spirituality. Yet, over time, this African context was downplayed or ignored altogether. Moses became a figure of the Near East, his African connections relegated to the background. The case of Jesus is more complex but equally compelling. While the Bible does not provide a detailed physical description of Jesus, his birthplace and the socio-political context of his life suggest a man of Middle Eastern or North African appearance. Early Christian art often depicted Jesus with darker skin and curly hair, reflecting the diversity of the regions where Christianity first spread. However, with the rise of European dominance, these depictions were replaced by images of a fair-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus, an image that continues to dominate Western art and iconography to this day. The erasure of their African roots also had theological implications. By distancing Jesus and Moses from Africa, European theologians were able to create a narrative that excluded African peoples from the divine story. This exclusion was not only a distortion of history, but also a tool of oppression. It reinforced the idea that Africa was a land without a spiritual legacy, a blank slate upon which Europeans could impose their religious and cultural values. The consequences of this historical revisionism are still felt today. The dominant image of Jesus as a European man has been internalized by millions of Christians around the world, shaping their understanding of divinity and humanity. This image has profound implications for people of African descent, many of whom struggle to see themselves reflected in the central figures of their faith. Similarly, the portrayal of Moses as a figure divorced from his African context has led to a narrow understanding of the biblical narrative, one that overlooks the profound influence of African culture and spirituality on the development of Judaism and Christianity. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to reclaim the African origins of these figures. Scholars, artists, and activists are challenging the dominant narratives, using historical evidence, archaeology, and biblical scholarship to paint a more accurate picture. This movement is not just about correcting the historical record, it is about reclaiming a sense of pride and identity for African people, about challenging the notion that Africa is a peripheral player in the story of humanity. The resistance to this movement is fierce, as it challenges deeply held beliefs and forces a reckoning with uncomfortable truths. For many, the idea of an African Jesus or Moses is not just a historical question but a deeply personal one, tied to their understanding of faith and identity. The process of unlearning these distorted narratives is a painful one, requiring a willingness to confront centuries of indoctrination and bias. Despite the challenges, the truth cannot be suppressed forever. The evidence for the African origins of Jesus and Moses is too compelling to ignore. From the geographical and cultural context of their lives to the early depictions of these figures in art and literature, the connections to Africa are undeniable. By embracing this truth, we can begin to undo the damage caused by centuries of erasure and create a more inclusive and accurate understanding of history. In conclusion, the erasure of the African origins of Jesus and Moses is a testament to the power of history as a tool of oppression and control. It reflects the broader struggle for representation and recognition that African people have faced for centuries. By reclaiming these narratives, we can begin to challenge the false dichotomy between Africa and the sacred, between blackness and divinity. In doing so, we not only honor the truth of history, but also affirm the dignity and humanity of all people, regardless of their race or heritage. This is not just a historical correction, it is a spiritual and cultural revolution, one that has the power to transform our understanding of the past and our vision for the future.